Hi guys, welcome to CADS 3853 module number 16. In this module we're going to talk about another stock efficiency measure called GMROI. Okay, this is the same slide we already saw in the previous module, which explained what inventory efficiency is and introduced the three different inventory efficiency measures, their names: turnover, GMROI, and SSR. In last module, we took a look at turnover in more detail, and in this module, we are going to focus on GMROI. GMROI is the abbreviation of gross margin return on inventory. Okay, so gross margin return per dollar of inventory at cost. Okay, in this case, this GMROI is another efficiency measure. So for any efficiency measure, we're looking at the input and output ratio, right? For turnover, the input was the average retail stock, average inventory at retail value, and that the output that we looked at was net sales, right? So the turnover was net sales divided by average inventory at retail. Whereas the GMROI is looking at the relationship between the average inventory at cost, not retail, and gross margin, not net sales. So the gross margin is used as the output measure, and the average inventory at the cost value is now used as the input measure. Okay, so per average inventory dollar at cost that you spend, how many dollars of gross margin is generated? That's the meaning of GMROI. So given that meaning, the GMROI formula number one will be the first formula we can think about is basically GMROI equals gross margin dollar divided by average inventory dollar at cost. Then, knowing that turnover is net sales over average inventory at retail, okay, we can turn this formula one, and we can take a look at the formula 2, which is gross margin percent times turnover over 100% minus markup percent. That gives the same GMROI as the first formula. Okay. Remember, the turnover is net sales over average inventory at retail. If you replace the turnover in the second formula with net sales over average inventory, you'll see that gross margin percent times net sales will be gross margin dollar, which was the numerator part of the first formula. And then average inventory at retail times 100% minus markup percent will be what we call average inventory dollar at cost, right? Because cost is retail times 100% minus markup percent. Okay, so basically the first and second formulas are going to give the same GMROI. Okay, depending on whichever the information that we already have. If we already have calculated turnover, for example, and we know what gross margin percent we are planning on, then we can plan GMROI based on these two numbers as well as the markup percent. Whereas if we know gross margin in dollar and average inventory at cost, then we can just use the first formula to calculate GMROI. Alright, so here's an simple example. Okay, let's use formula number one, okay, which was gross margin dollar over average inventory at cost. Okay, utilize that formula to work on this problem. Okay, so let's take a look at the answer. Now, gross margin was $25,000, annual gross margin, so $25,000 over average inventory at cost, what was given in the problem. So straightforwardly, you divide the gross margin by average inventory at cost. That's so GMROI was 2, right? So then, just like the case with the turnover, calculation is not all that complex, but what we need to really understand is the meaning of this number, right? So GMROI of 2 means what? Okay, kind of think about how we interpret turnover, okay, and think about what formula we are using to calculate GMROI. That will give us an idea about how to interpret this number, right? GMROI is nothing but the ratio between gross margin and average inventory at cost. So we can interpret GMROI as how many dollars of gross margin is generated for every dollar that we invest in the average inventory at cost, right? And since gross margin was given as an annual figure, again, this GMROI is for the whole year, right? Annual figure, right? It's an annual figure. So we, in sum, we interpret GMROI of 2 in this particular example, meaning for every dollar that we invest in average inventory at cost, $2 gross margin was generated annually, okay, whole year. Alright, let's work on another example problem. Okay, in this case, the setup gave us the net sales of $12,000 and average inventory at retail, not at cost, okay, $4,000. And then we know the cumulative markup percent of 51% and gross margin percent of 47.5. Okay, if this is the case, then let's try to compute GMROI and turnover from these numbers. Okay. But I suggest that you should try to use Formula 1 first. We can utilize Formula 2 too, but let's try to use Formula 1 first. Formula 1 of GMROI was gross margin dollar divided by average inventory at cost dollar, right? Gross margin dollar has to be driven from net sales and gross margin percent, right? Gross margin percent is percent of net sales, so if you multiply net sales and gross margin percent, that will give you gross margin dollar. Okay? For the denominator portion of that Formula 1 is average inventory at cost. And we know average inventory at the retail value. We also have the markup percent, so we can multiply average inventory at retail by 100% minus markup percent, and that will give us average inventory at cost, right? R times 100% minus markup percent equals the cost, right? So we are going to do it that way. So we first calculate gross margin dollar, and then calculate average inventory at cost, and then plug those two numbers in to come up with your GMROI figure. Okay. And also let's compute turnover, because turnover is net sales over average inventory at retail, and we are given both numbers, so we can easily calculate turnover. Okay. Let's pause the video here for a while you guys work on this problem. So like I said earlier, we wanted to calculate average inventory at cost and gross margin dollar first to use them to calculate GMROI. First, we converted the average inventory at retail to a cost value by multiplying average inventory at retail by 100% minus the markup percent, cumulative markup percent of 51%, right? So we got the average inventory at cost value of $1,960. Then we calculated gross margin dollar by multiplying gross margin percent by the net sales dollar, right? So $12,000 net sales times 47.5% gross margin, that gave us a gross margin dollar of $5,700. Now GMROI equals gross margin dollar over average inventory at cost. So $5,700 divided by $1,960. That is 2.91. So the GMROI of 2.91 is the answer. The question also asked you to calculate turnover, and we were lucky enough to have the net sales and average inventory at retail given in the problem. So we just straightforwardly use these numbers to calculate average the inventory turnover, which came up to be 3, right? Net sales over average inventory at retail. Now let's try to use the same data from this previous example, but try to compute the GMROI using the second formula, formula number 2. Okay, now that we have turnover just calculated, we can utilize formula 2 of GMROI, which was gross margin percent times turnover divided by 100% minus markup percent. Okay, let's utilize that to come up with GMROI. Again, you should have had exactly the same answer as that you calculate from formula using formula number 1, right? Gross margin percent of 47.5% times turnover of 3 and divide that by 100% minus the markup percent, 51%. It should be again 2.91. Okay, so either formula is used, you should get the same answer as long as all the other numbers are coming from the same setup. Then shall we talk about the meaning of this GMROI? So this GMROI was 2.91, right? So what does that mean? How do we interpret this GMROI? Okay, that will be again, for every dollar invested in average inventory at cost, okay, $2.91 in gross margin, okay, were generated. Unfortunately, the problem didn't give what period the gross margin was for. So whether it was annual gross margin or seasonal gross margin or monthly gross margin, we didn't know. So we cannot really specify the period for which this GMROI was calculated in this particular question. But in most other cases and in the real life, real world examples, you always know for what period the gross margin was calculated for, right? So that you will be able to know for what is this 2.9 $2.91 of gross margin were generated for how long a time, right? And that kind of thing. And that is a very important piece of information. Again, since we want to improve our stock efficiency, inventory efficiency, and we want to see how to improve gross margin return on inventory, right? GMROI. Just like it was the case for turnover, okay? When we say improving turnover, we mean we want to generate more sales given and with minimum amount of average inventory, right? The same goes for GMROI, right? When we say improving GMROI, we want to increase GMROI by generating more gross margin dollars as compared to or relative to your average inventory at cost. Okay, remember the GMROI formula. So that's where the idea came from. Okay, what about in terms of turnover? Okay, what is the relationship between turnover and GMROI? That's again, you think about the formula. Okay, GMROI could be gross margin percent times turnover over 100% minus markup. So the higher the turnover, the higher the GMROI is going to be. So when we say we are increasing stock efficiency, we're increasing both turnover and GMROI. Well, as I said earlier, inventory efficiency needs to be planned. And every company has a goal, like a turnover goal or a GMROI goal and things like that. Because these figures are used to plan the merchandise budget, okay, the dollar plan, assortment planning, all these things. When you plan inventory efficiency, we try to utilize some kind of target number as compared to like last year. So, or the industry average, whether you want to be higher than the industry average or lower than the industry average, that's kind of somewhat up to your strategy. But in a lot of cases, when we try to improve turnover or GMROI, we try to go probably above the industry average because we like it to be higher. Although they could be too high, as I said before when I explained the turnover. You know, sometimes turnover can be too high because you just don't have enough stock. We didn't buy enough merchandise, right? Not because you're really making good sales or in this the GMROI case, gross margin. So you have to have some kind of ideal turnover for your own company or your own store, but not necessarily that there's one ideal turnover or that one ideal GMROI, right? So just have to kind of balance it out and take a look at a lot of different benchmark numbers to be able to determine what would be the appropriate efficiency level. If you have the wrong efficiency level planned out and inaccurate efficiency goals or not having an efficiency goals, and those kind of things can lead to inaccurate investment in the inventory because you're going to have the wrong inventory level planned out or not having a good idea about what inventory level you should have, so which can influence your net sales, and then the remaining merchandise sitting in the store, which is going to lead to the decision of markdowns and things like that. And if you have to take a whole lot of markdown because you just couldn't plan your inventory level correctly, so you are ending up having a lot of leftover merchandise in the store toward the end of the season. With a lot of markdowns, you're going to actually reduce your net sales, or you may increase net sales dollar by marking things down because you can sell more, but relative to your sales, your cost of goods sold percentage is going to be pretty high, so which will reduce your gross margin and profit. So for all these reasons, having the right level of inventory efficiency is very, very important. So always have to plan the efficiency level very wisely. So the turnover and GMROI and things like that have to be planned out really carefully. So in conclusion, having an efficient inventory management or inventory investment is very important in ensuring profitability. When you are efficient with your inventory investment, you can maximize sales and gross margin while minimizing the inventory investment, right? The money that you have to spend to buy the merchandise. So basically having the right kind of merchandise at the right time and don't have excessive merchandise that you're not going to be able to sell. I said earlier that we would like turnover or GMROI to be high, right? But they could go too high, because we're just short of merchandise, we don't have enough stock, right? Things like that, when customers want to buy stuff, it's not there kind of way. But there are some cases and some examples of retailers, existing retailers, who actually utilize this high turnover as their key strategy for their success. So they intentionally put a extremely high turnover merchandise plan, investment plan, so that their merchandise is not going to really sit in the store for a long time. You can imagine fast fashion retailers such as Zara or H&M. They have extremely many SKUs, stock keeping units. They're dealing with many styles, many colors, many sizes, and things like that. But they turn them over very quickly, right? So not the same merchandise will be able to be seen in the store for a long time, right? So these are kind of retailers who's purposefully using high turnover. But other than these retailers, some other kind of regular retailers may not want their turnover to be so high that their customers feel like, okay, this store doesn't have the thing that they want. Well, I saw it yesterday, but I cannot see it today, kind of way. Unless that is your strategy, because the H&M and Zara and places like that, they utilize that mentality, the feeling, the perception the customers has about the scarcity, the lack of availability as the key success strategy. So kind of making the customers buy things more urgently. When they see it, they buy it. They need to buy it because otherwise they may not be able to see it tomorrow, kind of way. Alright, this concludes module number 16. So in the past couple of modules, we took a look at the turnover and GMROI as the two inventory efficiency measures. In next module, we are going to actually take a look at another efficiency measure called SSR, or stock sales ratio, in the context of how to utilize it to plan stock levels. Alright, so don't forget to work on module problem assignment number 16 about GMROI, and thanks for listening. Bye.